Hello, let's finish up intervals. On the back side of your interval worksheet, you are asked to name what each interval becomes when it is inverted. And the first question is, a minor third becomes blank. Well, we have a simple way to know that, but to get to it, let's go back to the beginning and let me present inversion of intervals to you. So here we have an interval from F to A, and you can name this interval, but we don't even need to do that right now. We're just going to see what it physically and graphically is to invert an interval. When you invert a vertical interval like this, we're just going to change the vertical order of the notes. So the note that was on the bottom is now going to be on the top. And a way to do that is to take the lower note up an octave, keep the upper note in the same place, and the lower note ends up above it. So we can quickly see that what was a third here becomes a sixth there. And this is very, very important. When the interval is inverted, it has to be the same two notes. We can also invert this interval by taking the upper note down an octave. Then we'll keep the lower note, the F, in the same place and bring the A down an octave. And we can see that either way, the F to A becomes A to F. But in both cases, it's the same two notes. Well, what can go wrong? Sometimes I'll see students do something like this. They'll want to invert the F to A, and they'll do it, and we get something that looks like this. Do you see what's happened there? This interval is not the inversion of that one. It's not the same two notes. We had an F and an A. We have an A and a C there, and it looks symmetrical. But what this is actually is a reflection. So this is not an inversion. You have to have the same two notes when you make an inversion. Now, naming the inversion. Let's name what's going on here. So this interval, I think we can quickly recognize as a major third using our work with intervals from before. And how about this one? A up to F, what is that? Well, we think in the key of the bottom note. A to F is a sixth. And since it's not an F sharp, which we'd expect in the key of A, it's a half step lower than that. There's a minor sixth. We can do the same thing here. Major third, and that A to F is a minor sixth. Now there's a rule that you can use, or a pattern, to figure out very quickly what the inversion of a major third is without having to draw the notes or identify the new interval. And let me make a little table for you. Major intervals invert to minor intervals, and vice versa. If we invert a minor interval, it becomes major. Augmented intervals invert to diminished intervals, and vice versa. Perfect intervals invert to perfect intervals, and vice versa. There's also a little table for numbers. The second inverts to the seventh, third to the sixth, and the fourth to the fifth. So let's apply our table to what we just did. Major, third. Major inverts to minor. Third inverts to sixth. So major, minor, third to sixth. That gives us the answer. Let's do a couple more over here. There's a nice blank spot. Let's look at D to G. Okay. So this is a perfect fourth, and we'll invert it by bringing the D up an octave, keep the G in the same place. That's an inversion. So what does our table tell us? Perfect to perfect, fourth to fifth. So that perfect fourth becomes a perfect fifth. We can also name these the old-fashioned way, just by counting the lines and spaces, but I think we'll quickly agree that that is, in fact, a perfect fifth. Let's do D to G sharp. And G sharp up to D. So you agree with me that all we've done is take the D up the octave and leave the G sharp in the same place. So we have flipped the vertical order of the two notes. Can we name this one? It was a perfect fourth. Now it's half a step bigger because the upper note has gone up a half step. This is an augmented fourth. What does our table tell us? Augmented inverts to diminished, fourth inverts to fifth, and sure enough, that is a diminished fifth, and you can confirm that using some of your techniques for doing hard intervals. Now, with that knowledge, we can go back to our practice sheet that you're going to complete and scan and turn into me, and name what each interval becomes when it's inverted. Now, this is easy for us. Minor inverts to major, 3 inverts to 6. Diminished fifth, we were just working with that one. The D will invert to augmented, 5 inverts to 4, and so forth. This will go by very quickly for you. This form of question I like to ask, even sometimes on tests. ID each interval, write its inversion next to it, and label the inversion. So there are 3 things you have to do. Here, here, and in that space there, you have to write it. So I identify this interval, A to D sharp. Well, A to D would be a perfect fourth because D is in the A major scale, but with a sharp on the D, this is now an augmented fourth. So we ID'd it, write the inversion next to it. Let's bring the A up an octave and keep the D sharp where it was. So we've flipped the vertical order of the notes, but we have the same 2 notes, A and D sharp and A. That's very important, it has to be the same 2 notes. Now we just do this kind of manipulation. Augmented becomes diminished, fourth becomes fifth, so just go ahead and complete the remaining ones on that line. The next exercise on our page says, ID each interval, and in the lower blanks, identify each as consonant or dissonant. Let's go back to our page of notes here and talk about consonant and dissonant intervals. These are terms that we've used ever since we've been in music and ensembles, and we have a sense for what a consonant sound is and what a dissonant sound is. I want to give you a way to think of this. A consonant sound is something we would think of as stable. A dissonant sound is something we would think of as unstable. Now notice there's not any judgment in here like consonant sounds are good sounds, dissonant sounds are bad sounds, or consonant sounds are beautiful and dissonant sounds are harsh. We're just talking within the functioning of tonal music where consonant sounds are ones where we could be at rest, and dissonant sounds the ear requires to move. For example, here's a consonant sound. This can be part of a nice stable chord like that. It could be the ending chord of a piece. A dissonant sound in its own way is just as beautiful, something like this, but it wants to move. And the resolution of that dissonance is considered a very beautiful thing in music. In fact, it's what gives music a lot of color and a lot of forward motion, to have dissonances mixed in with the consonances. So that's a way to think of it, but what we have to do right now is just classify intervals on our homework paper. So I need to tell you that the dissonant intervals include all seconds and sevenths. That means of any quality, major, minor, augmented, or diminished, seconds and sevenths are all dissonant. All augmented or diminished intervals are considered dissonant. And the perfect fourth, sometimes. Now, this takes some explanation, but we'll get to that in a moment. The consonant intervals are everything else. So that includes all the perfect intervals, like the perfect unison, perfect fifth, and the perfect octave, and the perfect fourth sometimes, right? Because if it was sometimes dissonant, it can only be sometimes consonant. The other consonant intervals are the major and minor, third, and sixth. So that covers everything. Now we're ready to look at our homework here and identify each interval and then say whether it's consonant or dissonant. It wouldn't be fair of me to put a perfect fourth in this list because it's sometimes consonant and sometimes dissonant, so I won't put that in there. You're not going to find it there. All the other ones you can classify. The first one, E to G sharp, we can quickly identify that as a major third, and we know that major thirds are consonant. So you're just going to follow through with that pattern. Okay, the last topic that I have to present to you about intervals is compound intervals. Identify each compound interval by number and quality. Compound just means bigger than an octave. So quickly, here's how that works. Say we have an interval that looks like this, C up to E. That's more than an octave, so how do we name that? Okay, so here's our method. See, I'll write the method over here. 1, reduce by an octave. So we're going to bring the top note down an octave. Now our interval looks like just a C to an E, so it's easy to name. So 1, reduce by an octave. 2, name it. Right, this is a major third. Now, step 3, add 7 and keep quality the same. And you've named the original interval. So the major third, if we add 7 to it and keep the quality of major, becomes a major 10th. How about this one? Let's do, if we have a C up to a D flat, that's more than an octave. So to name that one, we're going to bring the upper note down an octave, put it right close to the C there, and we can quickly name that as a minor second. If we add 7, keep the quality to the same, it's a minor 9th. Identify the interval by number and quality. The only tricky thing here is that the notes are spread across 2 staves, so we have to keep track of registers. From this B up to that E is more than an octave, so it is a compound interval. But let's bring the E down an octave where we can measure it easily with that B. So I'm going to put it on the lower staff here. That's an octave lower, and we can quickly name that as a perfect fourth, right? So that means our original interval had the same quality as this one, perfect, but the number should be 7 more. And our original interval thus was a perfect 11th. The last thing I'm asking you to do is identify melodic intervals. So the interval from B to D is going to go in this blank here. It's between the 2 notes. And the only trick to these is to remember that you always put the lower note on the bottom and think in that key and identify the interval that way. So from B up to D is some kind of a third. You'll figure out the quality. For this one, blank 2, we're talking about these 2 notes, right? It's between the D and the G sharp. So we can verticalize this and just put the G sharp here below the D, and that's the interval you're going to be naming. That'll go in that blank. Blank 10 is from this F up to that C.